acknowledging the traditional custodians of the Yuin Nation, the land that I live and work on, and also pay my respects to any First Nations people who this recording might reach. I'm really excited to present this research that I've been working on with you. It's still very much in the early stages and is actually part of a much larger project that I'm working on, which is on the invisibilities of gendered inequality in the age of remote and hybrid work. And part of this project has been looking at the role of appearance and dress codes and aesthetics and the role that they play in the contemporary workplace and the refashioning of professional attire that's taking place in this COVID work from home era. So this paper, Men in Heels and Workplace Attire, fits within this broader research on gender equality and changes in professional attire. At the same time as work attire has become more relaxed, as those working in white-collar jobs have predominantly moved to working from home due to COVID, and women in particular have swapped heels and skirts for activewear and slippers, there's also a growing community of cisgender men coming out and professing a love of wearing heels and campaigning to degender fashion. I started conducting a digital ethnography almost a year ago when I came across an image of Mark Briony, a 61-year-old cisgender, straight American robotics engineer living in Germany, who has somewhat of a celebrity following, amassing over 500,000 international followers on Instagram by cataloguing his daily outfits on his commute to and from work, which always includes a pencil skirt and stiletto heels. Now, Mark Briony is by no means the first bloke to put on a skirt and high heels, and there are these wonderfully fascinating and complex histories around gender and sexuality and fashion and queer and camp aesthetics that I'm really interested in. But what I became particularly intrigued with is the way that in his social media posts and in his fashion editorial interviews, Mark's expression of his gender identity is also often tied to an affirmation of his heterosexual identity. Organisations and workplaces are important sites where masculinity and heterosexuality are reproduced and established as normative, often through heterosexist language of policies that favour heterosexual family arrangements and cultural norms. So I feel like there is this opportunity here for a renewed discussion around gender and sexuality at work through professional work attire. And this study looks at how men in heels might destabilise organisational norms. What role can appearance play in creating more inclusive workplaces? So this led me scrolling Instagram through the popular hashtags men in heels and clothes have no gender to discover a small but emergent international group of self-identifying cisgender heterosexual men who also enjoy wearing heels and skirts in the public sphere and who also regularly post about this online. And as I say, this research is very much in its infancy and I welcome your feedback. So I just want to share a little bit of what I've found so far, as well as elaborate on some of the ethical considerations of this project. And then lastly, to briefly reflect on the connections between gender, sexuality, and contemporary fashion trends and the role that aesthetics can play in creating more inclusive workplaces. So if you aren't on Instagram, Instagram is a social networking app designed to share photos and videos from a mobile device. And I think it's a really interesting site to observe the reproduction and subversion of socio-cultural norms. The app is designed to document moments in time with posts ordered sequentially on the user's profile. And I have to admit, I use the app every day. So I regularly encounter these accounts and these hashtags, but I've also conducted more detailed analyses on a monthly basis. And as I mentioned, I focus my ethnography on men who identify with the sex they were assigned at birth, and for the purposes of this study also identify as heterosexual. So while I'm interested in this particular subgroup, the parameters of this study are porous, which means that I've also been looking at non-binary and gender fluid or genderqueer users as well. because gender is not a linear spectrum. So using Robards and Lincoln's scrollback method, which entails looking at the temporal dimensions of sustained use on the app, scrolling back through the profiles and images, I not only began to learn of their personal journey to wearing heels and stockings and skirts and stilettos, I also discovered an interactive online community with many users commenting and liking and sharing on each other's posts. The content analysed in this study was all posted with the intention of visibility. These are public accounts. Many of them are social influencers or content creators, in that there is often an educational as well as a commercial intention in their posts. The content that they post is intended for public consumption. However, it's still important to reflect on this and consider the potential vulnerabilities of the people behind the usernames. So Mark Bryan, for instance, has achieved this cult celebrity status and is featured in high-end fashion magazines like Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. But for some of the other accounts that I follow, they have a much smaller reach, and their posts are far more personal or intimate in nature. Even though they may have their account set to public, some often might pixelate their face or only take selfies of their feet and legs. So I'm quite conscious that as this project evolves, so too do the ethical considerations. And I'm really being guided here by the scholars in this area, such as Southerton and McCann, Kanai and Aberdeen, who are all very experienced social media researchers and who are really mapping out this digital and ethical terrain. So the examples and photographs from the study that I draw on here are from those from higher profile accounts whose images and words have been cross-posted in mainstream media and other public fora. But also, to add a further layer of anonymity, I'm treating their online identities as if that's their real name, so I'm using pseudonyms where appropriate as well. Men's work attire choices express varying forms of masculinity, and men's conformity to sartorial codes is one way in which they express their gender and sexual identities. Taking on gender insights on masculinities from the works of Connell and queer theory from Hearn and Rumens, I want to draw on the concept of queer heterosexuality as an analytical framework for exploring how clothing can be used as an embodied and aesthetic tool to communicate and challenge and influence organisations and individuals' perceptions of gender and sexual identities and their perceptions of equality and inclusion in the workplace. Heterosexuality and heteronormativity are not inseparable. And so queer heterosexuality is an attempt to denaturalize heterosexuality, disentangling it from normative designations of good and desirable or bad and undesirable. Queer heterosexuality also gives legitimacy to the lived experiences of cisgender heterosexual men who wear high heels, skirts and dresses and tights in their everyday lives, which as an act in itself is one that confronts gender norms. So what have I found so far? Well, users' profiles often contain self-descriptions such as straight and cis man, and husband and father who find self-expression in wearing heels, femme attire enthusiast, heels collector, straight guy married to a supportive wife, women, wives, children, and stereotypically masculine type hobbies and interests such as sport, beer, whiskey, cars, and outdoor recreational activities often feature in the posts and images or text of these men in heels users. As one user, Anthony, reflects, oftentimes people who choose to dress gender-free are labelled a certain way. I'm a cisgender man married to a woman, and it's very often surprising people. Through my clothing style, I can make my values visible to the outside world. John similarly shares his vulnerability with coming out as a male that enjoys wearing heels, wishing that society would be more acceptable so that I could wear them all the time. For men who wear feminine presenting clothing in public, there is this both this desire to be seen and a fear of being recognised. Here, queering accepted visual codes via attire and aesthetic enables a reconsideration of the presence and absence of paradoxical visibility. For Mark, the masculine aesthetic of a shirt and tie and blazer up top and ultra-feminine pencil skirt and Louis Vuittons below the waist, although he describes this below the waist look as gender neutral, he describes this as a fashion statement. It's not about being either masculine or feminine. And his main message is that I don't feel any different when I'm wearing a skirt or when I'm wearing pants. To me, it's just a piece of cloth and a fashion style. It has nothing to do with sexuality or anything like that. The acronym that clothes have no gender is a common hashtag amongst the Men in Heels accounts. And while it may hold true in a material sense, clothes are imbued with gendered, raced, and classed cultural meaning. The gender hybrid aesthetic of Mark and others could be considered a type of masculinity that subsumes the feminine. Such an analysis may align with what Schlitzer holds about the discourse of queer heterosexuality as just another instance of heterosexuality insisting on itself. In this instance, queer heterosexuality may begin to look suspiciously like a push for heterosexuality to have it all, to be both dominant and marginalised, and such that heterosexuality invites itself along to the fashionably cool queer party without having to have paid the dues of marginalisation. And this is what Billy Porter, the actor Billy Porter, has argued when Vogue put musician cis man Harry Styles on the cover in a dress for the first time in the magazine's history. Porter reminds us that systems of oppression mute new fashion conversations, and these are conversations that could bring us closer to a more inclusive society. So what started with a queer black man was then transferred to a white cis het man without the recognition of those who popularise these trends. Now, not all cisgender heterosexual men in heels are as confident as Mark and Anthony, who I quoted before. Paul, who regularly posts selfies of his daily outfits, blending lacy hosiery, pearls and miniskirts with his men's shirts and cardigans. In one post, he shares a photo of himself wearing a suit jacket, a preppy vest, indigo wash jeans and beige stilettos with the caption, "Job interview with heels. I wish," sad face. Another user, Matthew, who often posts photos of his office attire while at work, including fitted dresses and skirts and boots, he posts, "I realise how incredibly fortunate I am to work in higher ed, which is probably more welcoming than most places, but I continue to do what I can to make this world a more open and welcoming place for each of us." Heteromasculinity is deeply implicated in the gendering of organisations and work and workplace inequality. And I think we need to also recognise the privilege of these predominantly white heterosexual men who wear and share their experiences of dressing in heels on social media. While these representations can create new fashion conversations, they also have the potential to mute the queer and camp origins of those men who wear heels, and the way that this fashion trend can block those who are already marginalised from being part of the mainstream. So I guess the emphasis here is not on whether heterosexuals can or cannot claim a queer identity, but about the queering of heterosexuality itself. Queering accepted visual codes via attire and aesthetics enables a reconsideration of the presence and absence of power and privilege and visibility at work. What I hope I've shown here is the way in which these men who wear traditionally feminine clothing at work simultaneously challenge and reinforce gender norms. And it presents an opportunity from which to interrogate the oppressive effects of dominant forms of masculinity and how heterosexuality jars with normativity, opening up debates for rethinking through equality and inclusion at work through the powers of dress. So thank you, and I really look forward to the discussion with you next.
Thank you for that presentation, Briony. Such interesting work. Really fascinated. And I want to kick off our Q&A session now about your research. And one of the questions that came up for me, and I think is coming up a little bit in the chat as well, is around how Men in Heels obviously has the potential to destabilize organizational norms around gender. But one of the questions I was left kind of wondering with is, in your ethnography, when you're kind of observing all these different accounts, you might also be observing kind of the commentary on images that they might be posting, etc. You know, who has the ability, do you think, what does the person who has the ability to destabilize look like or have as a background versus someone who might become a victim of backlash? So could it be things like gender, race, income, class, education? How are you kind of seeing those effects unfold within your data?
That's a really great question. Certainly in this group of accounts that I've been looking at, it's quite an interconnected and interactive community, and so it has been quite, you know, the commentary and the sharing has all been very positive. I haven't seen too much sort of trolls coming in and posting negative comments. So in a way, that's it seems like quite a positive and supportive environment. But then when you look at other high profile accounts like Alok's account, they get a lot of vitriol on there, and so that's part of their way of talking about degendering fashion, and is through exposing the trolls, I guess, as well, to highlight the gendered, raced and classed assumptions that are embedded in those negative comments, if that makes sense. Yeah. So far it's quite this community is quite friendly, but certainly power and privilege has there's a lot going on there with power and privilege. Yeah.
And just a follow-up question to kind of the way that you've designed a study, and I know that you can't do everything in one study because that's impossible, but I'm just curious about your phenomena. Does queer heterosexuality, like something like Men in Heels, manifest adjacent for other gender expressions? So, you know, for women or gender non-conforming individuals, like does queer hetero, I'm not really sure what the word would be, but does that kind of manifest for other groups as well?
That's a great question too. What I was really thought that was useful about the you know, concept of queer heterosexuality is the way that it's destabilizing the norms around heteronormativity and sort of, yeah, pulling them apart more. So certainly I think there's opportunities to use that to question, question more of those norms that occur in organizations and workplaces. Yeah.
Lovely. We've got time for a few more questions, so I might just throw some more at you. One is about, did you come across any insights from the cross-dressing community?
So I mentioned just a few of the hashtags that I'd been looking at, but some of the other hashtags do involve, you know, hashtag cross-dressing or hashtag cross-dressing man. And that's not something I've delved too much into because, as I was sort of saying, there's so many threads here and so many histories to do with fashion and gender and sexuality. So I haven't really explored, and, you know, thinking about drag as well, and then cross-dressing. So, and they all have sort of different connotations and different meanings in different spheres. So I haven't really explored that too much yet. But it's, yeah, it does cross over in a way, but yeah, I haven't looked at that yet. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, we've got still time for a few more, so let's see. How can this enable workplaces to challenge social norms and support employees while in a way that doesn't have a negative impact on the spectrum of gender and sexuality?
Yeah, that's a really really great question too. And I don't really have a straightforward answer to that one, because it is so complex. And I guess I was trying to highlight these tensions that are going on in this movement, and with what people wear, and the way that professional attire is such a nuanced concept, and it's imbued with these social norms and power relations, and also thinking about expectations around performance at work as well, and productivity and professionalism. They're all grounded in this gendered narrative of the ideal worker and heteronormativity. So yeah, I'm not too sure what to suggest for that one, but it needs to, I think we need to have a sensitivity around this, because on the one hand, these men that are, you know, coming to work in more traditionally feminine clothing and heels are sort of challenging these norms, but at the same time don't want to silence other groups, like I had mentioned.
I think the other thing that this plays into is probably the idea of professional identity. What is considered professional, acceptable at work.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think there's a lot of sort of insight we could probably draw from certain type of service industries that require uniforms that look a particular way. I think, you know, the aviation history has had a long history of using aesthetic labor, and, you know, the way that people representing that organization in the front line looks, you know, groomed, makeup, etc. So I think there's some really interesting groundwork that you're doing, and it's some really interesting, important work. Where are you looking to kind of take this project into the future, and, like, you know, which rabbit holes are you going to go down next?
Yeah, that's a really great question too, and I've been thinking a lot about that when I've been thinking about the sensitivities around this project. And I think I would like to perhaps do some interviews next, and thinking about, I guess, to address some of the questions that are in the Q&A about, like, how do we build competencies around managers responding to gender expression, or how do we create more inclusive environments and more accepting environments at work. So I guess bringing in looking at leadership as well, and maybe qualitative interviews might be the way forward with that, to kind of gather some more in-depth insights on people's experiences in the workplace. Yeah.
Awesome. We might just throw a quick more rapid fire ones at you. Did you do any research on the opinions of LGBT people, particularly trans and non-binary identities, on this topic?
Well, so far, I mean, this is very small scale at the moment, and I only just started really analysing what I've sort of uncovered so far, but I really have focused it on looking at this particular group, but at the same time trying to be definitely cognizant of other groups, you know, trans and non-conforming and queer people, and their sort of feelings around this. I haven't seen too much so far, but I sort of wanted to use that sort of celebrity example as a really clear way of highlighting what might be some of the problems with this topic.
Thank you so much for sharing your research and insights with us. It's such important work, and we're so privileged that you took the time to do another online event to share this with us. So thanks again. We'll be closing the session here and moving on to our third paper just now. So
thank you. Such great comments. I'm going to hopefully copy them all so I can think about this moving forward in a really more deeply. Thank you.
Okay.